Katie Morgan pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the alien corridor. Her heart pounded as she listened for the sound of approaching footsteps. The mission had gone wrong from the very beginning. What should have been a simple reconnaissance of the Vortex ship had turned into a nightmare. The intel had been wrong. Dead wrong. The ship wasn't empty like Earth Command had promised. Instead, it crawled with insectoid aliens who moved with terrifying precision through the dark hallways. Their chittering voices echoed off the walls as they searched for her. Katie checked her weapon. Only 3 shots left. Not nearly enough to fight her way out of this mess. She had been aboard the alien vessel for 2 hours, gathering data about their technology. The information she had collected could save thousands of human lives. But only if she could get it back to the Aurora. A sound made her freeze. Heavy footsteps were coming closer. Katie ducked behind a strange piece of machinery that hummed with alien energy. Through the gaps in the equipment, she could see them. 3 Vortex soldiers moved down the corridor like deadly spiders. Their black eyes swept back and forth, searching. Katie held her breath. The aliens had 4 arms each, and every arm held a weapon. Their skin looked like dark metal, and when they moved, she could hear the soft clicking of their joints. These weren't the first Vortex she had seen, but being this close to them made her skin crawl. The lead alien stopped right in front of her hiding spot. It tilted its head, listening. Katie's hand moved slowly to her sidearm. If they found her, she would take as many as possible with her. Then the alien moved on. Katie waited until their footsteps faded before she dared to move. She needed to find a way off this ship. Her escape pod had been destroyed when she first boarded. The only way out was to somehow steal one of their ships or signal the Aurora for pickup. Katie activated her communicator. Static filled her earpiece. She tried different frequencies, but nothing worked. The alien ship was jamming all signals. She was completely cut off from her team. As she moved through the ship, Katie memorized everything she saw. Strange symbols covered the walls. Alien technology hummed and glowed in ways that hurt her eyes. The Vortex had built this ship like a hive. Tunnels and passages connected in patterns that made no sense to human mind. She found what looked like a computer terminal. The symbols on the screen changed rapidly, showing information she couldn't read. Katie attached a small device to the terminal. It would copy whatever data it could access. Every piece of information about Vortex technology could help Earth's defenses. While the device worked, Katie heard something that made her blood run cold. Voices. Not the chittering of the Vortex, but human voices. Other prisoners. She followed the sound through twisting passages until she found a large room. Inside, she could see holding cells made of some kind of energy field. Human prisoners sat inside, looking beaten and hopeless. Katie counted 12 people, all wearing the uniforms of Earth Defense Force. Katie's mind raced. She couldn't leave them behind. But she also couldn't save them all. Her mission was to gather intelligence and get back to Earth. The data she carried could save millions. But these 12 people were right here, right now. Before she could decide, the choice was taken away from her. A net of crackling energy dropped from the ceiling, wrapping around her body. The electrical shock sent her to her knees. Her weapon clattered across the floor. Vortex soldiers emerged from hidden passages. They had been waiting for her. Katie tried to reach for her gun, but the energy net made her muscles spasm with every movement. She was trapped. The largest Vortex approached her. This one wore different markings than the soldiers. A commander, Katie realized. It spoke in its own language first, then switched to broken English. Human spy, it said, its voice like grinding metal. You come to steal our secrets. Katie said nothing. The commander gestured, and 2 soldiers lifted her to her feet. The energy net stayed in place, keeping her muscles weak and useless. We know about your ship, the alien continued. The Aurora waits beyond our sensor range. They hope you return with information. Katie's heart sank. If the Vortex knew about the Aurora, her crew was in danger. The commander seemed to read her thoughts. "Do not worry about your friends. We will deal with them soon. But first, you will serve a different purpose." The soldiers dragged Katie through more corridors. She tried to memorize the path, but the alien architecture confused her. Everything looked the same. Passages branched and merged in patterns that hurt to think about. They brought her to a room filled with strange equipment. In the center sat a device that looked like a crystal cage. It pulsed with blue light and hummed with dangerous energy. Katie had never seen anything like it, but she knew a weapon when she saw one. "This is a quantum destabilizer," the commander explained. "It will create a small tear in space itself. Very useful for destroying enemy ships." The soldiers forced Katie to sit next to the device. Before she could react, metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. The chains were short, keeping her hands close to the glowing crystal. "The device will detonate in 6 hours," the commander said. "When it does, this entire section of our ship will be destroyed. We consider this an acceptable loss to eliminate a human spy." Katie pulled at the chains. The metal felt strange under her fingers. Not like any alloy she knew. The cuffs were smooth and seamless, with no visible lock mechanism. "Your friends on the Aurora will receive our message," the commander continued. "They will know that humans who trespass on Vorthak territory will die. Perhaps they will think twice before sending more spies." The aliens left her alone with the bomb. Katie stared at the device, watching the blue light pulse faster. 6 hours until detonation. 6 hours to find a way out of impossible situation. She tested the chains again. They didn't give at all. The cuffs were tight around her wrists but not tight enough to cut off circulation. Small comfort when she was about to be blown up. Katie closed her eyes and forced herself to think. She had trained for situations like this. Not exactly like this, but close enough. The first rule of survival was never give up. There was always a way out. Always. She just had to find it. Katie opened her eyes and studied her prison. The room was small and dimly lit. The only light came from the pulsing blue crystal next to her. Every few seconds, it would glow brighter, and she could feel heat radiating from its surface. She looked down at the handcuffs around her wrists. The metal was dark gray and felt warm to the touch. There were no visible screws, hinges, or locks. The cuffs seemed to be made from a single piece of material. Katie had never seen anything like them. The chain connecting the cuffs was about 2 feet long. Just long enough to let her move her hands a little, but not long enough to reach anything useful. She was positioned so that her hands stayed close to the crystal device. If she tried to lean away, the chain pulled tight and forced her back. Katie tested the strength of the metal. She pulled as hard as she could, but nothing happened. The cuffs didn't even scratch. Whatever this material was, it was stronger than anything humans had developed. She examined the crystal device more carefully. It was about the size of a basketball and seemed to be made of some kind of blue mineral. Inside the crystal, she could see patterns of light moving like liquid electricity. The patterns moved faster every few minutes. A countdown display floated above the crystal. The symbols were alien, but Katie could tell it was counting down. Based on what the commander had told her, she had about 5.5 hours left. Katie forced herself to stay calm. Panic would not help her now. She had been trained by the best survival instructors on Earth. They had taught her to break down every problem into smaller parts. Find what you can control. Work with what you have. What did she have? Not much. She was wearing her standard uniform. Her weapons were gone. Her communicator had been taken. Even her emergency kit had been removed from her belt. The Vorthak had been thorough. But they hadn't taken everything. Katie felt around in her pockets and found a few small items they had missed. A piece of wire she used for equipment repairs. A small mirror for signaling. A dental pick that had been hiding in the lining of her jacket. The dental pick made her think. During survival training, her instructor had taught her about improvised lock picking. He had shown her how to use anything thin and strong as a pick. Paper clips, bobby pins, even pieces of wire. Katie looked at the handcuffs again. There had to be some kind of locking mechanism. Even alien technology needed a way to open and close. She just had to find it. She felt around the cuffs with her fingers. The surface was completely smooth on the outside. But when she turned her wrists, she found something different. On the inside of each cuff, near where they touched her skin, there were tiny holes. They were so small she almost missed them. Katie tried to insert the dental pick into one of the holes. It was too big. The wire was also too thick. She needed something smaller and more flexible. Meanwhile, somewhere in space, the Aurora waited. Captain Rex Hamilton paced the bridge, checking his watch every few minutes. Katie should have been back hours ago. Her mission was supposed to be simple. Get in, gather data, get out. Still no signal from Lieutenant Morgan, reported the communications officer. Rex clenched his fists. He had trained Katie himself. She was one of the best intelligence officers he had ever worked with. If something had happened to her, he would never forgive himself. Commander Parker, he called to his second-in-command. How long before we can risk a closer approach? Lisa Parker checked her instruments. The Vorthack ship is still jamming all frequencies. If we get too close, they'll detect us. But we can't wait much longer. If Katie is in trouble. Rex nodded. They all knew the risks. But they couldn't abandon one of their own. Back on the alien ship, Katie was having her own problems. She had been trying to pick the lock for over an hour with no success. The holes in the cuffs seemed to go deeper than she could reach. And every time she thought she felt something inside, it would shift away from her probe. The crystal device was pulsing faster now. The countdown showed she had less than 5 hours remaining. Katie wiped sweat from her forehead. The crystal was getting hotter as time passed. She tried a different approach. Instead of trying to pick the lock, she examined the chain itself. Maybe she could break or remove it somehow. But the chain was made of the same strange metal as the cuffs. It felt warm and slightly flexible, but incredibly strong. Katie pulled at different parts of the chain, looking for weak points. She found where the chain connected to each cuff. The connections looked solid, but she noticed something interesting. When she twisted the chain in a certain way, she could hear a faint clicking sound from inside the cuffs. She tried twisting harder. The clicking got louder. Something was moving inside the locking mechanism. Katie felt a small surge of hope. Maybe the aliens had made their locks too complicated. Maybe all that clicking meant the mechanism was starting to break down. But after 10 minutes of twisting, nothing happened. The cuffs remained locked tight. Katie's wrists were getting sore from all the pulling and twisting. She sat back and thought about the problem differently. Her survival instructor had taught her that sometimes the obvious solution wasn't the right one. Sometimes you had to think like your enemy. The Vorthack were insectoid creatures. They had 4 arms instead of 2. Their hands were different from human hands. Maybe their locks were designed for their anatomy, not human anatomy. Katie looked at her hands again. Human fingers were long and flexible. But the Vorthack had shorter, stronger digits. Maybe their locks required a different kind of manipulation. She tried moving her fingers in ways that felt unnatural to her. Bending them at strange angles. Pressing multiple fingers together. The clicking sounds got more frequent, but still nothing opened. 4 hours and 30 minutes left. Katie was getting frustrated. Every technique she knew was failing. The alien technology was just too different from anything she had encountered before. She needed to try something completely new. That was when she remembered another lesson from survival training. Her instructor had told her about prisoners who had escaped from seemingly impossible situations. Not by using tools or techniques, but by using parts of their bodies in ways their captors hadn't expected. She had heard stories of people who had picked locks with their toes. Others who had used their teeth to manipulate tiny mechanisms. The human body was more flexible and capable than most people realized. Katie looked at the handcuffs from a new angle. Her hands were positioned in front of her body. If she leaned forward carefully, she could bring her face close to the cuffs. Close enough to see the tiny holes clearly. Close enough to try something crazy. Katie took a deep breath. This was going to hurt, and it might not work at all. But she was running out of time and options. Sometimes desperate situations required desperate solutions. She leaned forward and opened her mouth. Katie positioned her face close to her left wrist. The handcuff felt warm against her cheek. She could smell something like burnt metal mixed with ozone. The alien device next to her hummed louder, and the blue light made everything look strange and unreal. She examined the tiny holes in the handcuff more carefully. There were 3 of them, each no bigger than a pinhead. They were arranged in a triangle pattern on the inside surface of the cuff. Katie couldn't see how deep they went, but when she breathed on them, she could feel air moving inside. This was definitely some kind of lock mechanism. The question was how to activate it. Katie opened her mouth and carefully positioned her canine tooth near the first hole. Her instructor back on Earth had told her that human teeth were actually incredibly strong and precise tools. Early humans had used their teeth for everything from cutting leather to shaping wood. She pressed the tip of her tooth into the hole. It was a tight fit, but it went in about a quarter inch before hitting something solid. Katie felt around inside the hole with her tooth tip. There was definitely something mechanical in there. She tried pressing harder. Nothing happened. She tried wiggling her tooth from side to side. Still nothing. But when she tried a slight twisting motion, she felt something give way inside the mechanism. There was a soft click, and Katie felt the tooth sink deeper into the hole. Progress. She moved to the second hole. This one was positioned at an awkward angle. Katie had to turn her head almost sideways to reach it. Her neck muscles started to ache, but she ignored the discomfort. The second hole felt different. When she inserted her tooth, she could feel multiple moving parts inside. It was like a tiny puzzle box. Katie had to twist her tooth in one direction, then the other, then push straight down. After several tries, she heard another click. The third hole was the hardest to reach. Katie had to bend her wrist at a painful angle and crane her neck until her jaw muscles cramped. But she was getting the hang of how these alien locks worked. Each hole required a different sequence of movements. It was like they had designed the lock to be opened by someone with multiple hands and flexible joints. Someone like a Vorthack. But humans were more flexible than the aliens had counted on. The third mechanism took longer to figure out. Katie had to use not just the tip of her tooth, but the side edge as well. She pressed and twisted and pushed until finally, she heard the loudest click yet. Suddenly, the left handcuff sprang open. Katie's heart jumped with excitement. One hand was free. She flexed her fingers and rotated her wrist, getting the blood flowing again. The relief was incredible. But her celebration was short-lived. As soon as the first cuff opened, the crystal device next to her began pulsing faster. Much faster. The blue light became brighter and more intense. The humming sound turned into a high-pitched whine. Katie looked at the countdown display. The symbols were changing more rapidly now. She couldn't read alien numbers, but she could tell the device was accelerating. Instead of having 4 hours left, it looked like she might have less than 2. Opening the first handcuff had triggered some kind of security system. Katie cursed under her breath. Of course the aliens would have a backup plan. They wouldn't make it easy for prisoners to escape. She had to get the second cuff off quickly, before the bomb detonated early. The second cuff was on her right wrist. With her left hand now free, she could approach the problem differently. She could see the lock holes more clearly and position herself better. But she could also see that the holes on the right cuff were different from the left one. They were smaller and positioned in a different pattern. The aliens had made each cuff unique, probably to prevent exactly what she was trying to do. Katie tried using her fingers first. But even with her hand free, she couldn't get the right angle to manipulate the tiny mechanisms inside the holes. Her fingernails were too thick, and she couldn't feel what was happening inside the lock. She went back to using her teeth. This time, she had to use different teeth for different holes. Her canine tooth worked for one hole, but the second required her smaller incisor. The third hole was so tiny she had to use the sharp edge of her lateral incisor. Each hole required its own sequence of movements. Push, twist, pull back, twist the other way, push again. Katie felt like she was learning to speak a new language with her teeth. Her jaw was starting to ache terribly. She had been working for over an hour, bending and twisting her neck in unnatural positions. But she couldn't stop now. The crystal device was getting hotter and brighter every minute. The second hole clicked open. One more to go. The third hole was positioned right where the cuff curved around her wrist bone. Katie had to bend her arm at an almost impossible angle to reach it. She felt something pop in her shoulder, and pain shot down her arm. But she kept working. Pain was temporary. Being blown up was permanent. Inside the third hole, the mechanism felt different from all the others. It seemed to have more moving parts, all of them tiny and delicate. Katie had to be very careful not to push too hard and break something important. She worked by feel, using the tip of her tooth like a blind person reading Braille. Press here, feel for resistance. Twist gently until something moved. Back off and try a different approach. Minutes ticked by. The crystal device was now pulsing so fast it looked like a strobe light. The heat was becoming unbearable. Katie could smell her uniform starting to singe. Then, finally, she felt the last piece of the mechanism slide into place. There was a satisfying click, and the second handcuff opened. Katie pulled her hands away from the crystal device and scrambled backward as far as the small room would allow. Both cuffs lay empty on the floor, but she wasn't safe yet. The crystal device was now completely out of control. The blue light was so bright it hurt to look at directly. The humming sound had become a shriek that made her ears ring. And worst of all, Katie could see cracks forming in the crystal itself. But something else was happening too. As she watched, she realized the device wasn't just a bomb. It was doing something to the space around it. The air near the crystal looked wrong somehow. It shimmered and twisted like heat waves, but much more intense. Katie had studied quantum physics in school. She knew what a space-time distortion looked like, at least in theory. If the aliens were telling the truth about this being a quantum destabilizer, then this wasn't just an explosion she had to worry about. This thing could tear a hole in reality itself. Katie looked around the room desperately. There had to be some way to shut it down or at least slow it down. But all the controls were covered in alien symbols she couldn't read. She was free from the handcuffs, but now she faced an even bigger problem. She had maybe 30 minutes before the device destroyed everything within miles. And she was the only one who could stop it. Katie cracked her knuckles and got to work. Time to see what other impossible things a human could accomplish when there was no other choice. Katie wiped sweat from her forehead and studied the alien control panels around the room. The crystal device behind her was making sounds like a tea kettle about to explode. She didn't have much time to figure this out. The walls were covered with displays showing symbols that meant nothing to her. Some panels had what looked like buttons, others had smooth surfaces that might be touch controls. Everything was designed for alien hands with 4 fingers instead of 5. Katie started with the panel closest to the crystal device. When she touched it, symbols flashed across the screen. She pressed different areas randomly, hoping to stumble across something useful. Most of her touches did nothing, but occasionally the display would change. One symbol appeared more often than others. It was shaped like a spiral inside a circle. Every time Katie saw it, the crystal device would pulse brighter. She decided that symbol probably meant danger or activation. Katie tried to find controls that would make the spiral symbol go away. She touched every surface she could reach, pressed every button-like shape. Sometimes the display would flicker or change colors, but the spiral symbol always came back. She moved to the next panel. This one had physical controls that looked like sliding switches. Katie tried moving them in different combinations. When she moved one all the way to the left, the crystal device quieted down slightly. Progress. But when she tried to move the second switch, an alarm started blaring. Red lights flashed around the room, and new symbols appeared on all the displays. Katie quickly moved the switch back to its original position. The alarm stopped, but the crystal device resumed its angry humming. Katie realized she was approaching this all wrong. She was thinking like a human trying to understand human technology. But this was alien technology, built by minds that worked completely differently from hers. She closed her eyes and tried to think like a Vorthack. They were insectoid creatures that lived in hives. They probably thought in terms of group cooperation rather than individual action. Their technology would reflect that mindset. Katie opened her eyes and looked at the control panels again. Instead of trying to find an off switch or emergency stop, she looked for patterns. Maybe the controls were designed to work together in sequences. She started with the first panel again, but this time she paid attention to how touching one area affected the others. When she pressed a button on the left, symbols on the right side of the panel would change. When she touched the right side, the left side would respond. It was like the panel was designed for someone with multiple hands who could manipulate several controls at the same time. The Vorthack had 4 arms. They could probably operate 4 different controls simultaneously. Katie didn't have 4 arms, but she had other advantages. Human fingers were longer and more flexible than Vorthack digits. She could reach controls that were positioned far apart. She tried using both hands on the first panel, touching multiple areas at once. Suddenly, new options appeared on the display. Symbols she hadn't seen before started flashing in different colors. One of them looked promising. It was shaped like 2 spirals moving away from each other. The opposite of the danger symbol she had seen earlier. Katie touched it while holding down 2 other controls. The crystal device changed its tune. Instead of an angry whine, it started making a deeper, more rhythmic sound. The blue light was still intense, but it wasn't getting brighter anymore. Katie had bought herself some time, but she wasn't done yet. The device was still active and dangerous. She needed to figure out how to shut it down completely. She moved to the second panel and tried the same multi-handed approach. This panel seemed to control the countdown timer. When she manipulated several controls at once, the alien symbols changed. She couldn't read them, but she could see that the countdown was slowing down. The third panel was more complex. It had dozens of small controls arranged in patterns that hurt her eyes to look at. Katie guessed this was the main system control. If she could master this panel, she might be able to shut down the entire device. But every time she tried to use multiple controls, different alarms would start blaring. Red lights, blue lights, yellow lights. The noise was deafening. Katie had to cover her ears with her shoulders while she worked. After 20 minutes of trial and error, Katie started to understand the logic behind the alien interface. It wasn't designed to be operated by one person. It required multiple operators working in perfect coordination. Each Vorthack would be responsible for a different aspect of the device, and they would have to synchronize their actions. But Katie was just one person. She had to find a way to do the work of 4 aliens at the same time. She looked around the room and found some loose cables and metal strips that had fallen from damaged panels. Katie used these to prop certain controls in specific positions. That way, she could keep multiple settings active while using her hands to manipulate other controls. It was like playing a complex musical instrument while juggling. Katie had to coordinate her hands, elbows, and even her knees to keep all the necessary controls activated simultaneously. Slowly, the crystal device began to respond. The angry humming faded to a whisper. The blue light dimmed to a soft glow. The space-time distortions around the crystal started to stabilize. But Katie wasn't finished yet. The device was still armed and dangerous. She had managed to slow it down, but it would still explode eventually. She needed to find a way to completely disarm it. The problem was that she was running out of ideas. She had figured out how to operate the alien controls, but she still didn't understand what they actually did. She was working blind, making changes and hoping for the best. Then Katie had a different idea. Instead of trying to shut down the device, maybe she could change what it was targeting. The Vorthack commander had said the device was locked onto her biosignature. What if she could make it lock onto something else instead? Katie found what looked like a sensor array near the crystal. It was covered with small lenses and metal probes. This was probably how the device identified its target. She carefully removed one of the sensor probes and carried it to the far side of the room. If the device was tracking this probe instead of her, maybe she could move away from the crystal without triggering an immediate explosion. Katie held her breath and took a step backward. Nothing happened. Another step. Still nothing. The device continued its quiet humming, apparently content to monitor the probe instead of her. Katie felt a wave of relief. She was no longer chained to the bomb. But she still wasn't safe. The device was still active, and it was still capable of tearing a hole in space-time. She had to find a way to shut it down permanently. And that meant taking an even bigger risk. Katie approached the crystal itself. Up close, she could see that it wasn't just one solid piece. It was made up of dozens of smaller crystals arranged in a complex pattern. Each small crystal was connected to the others by thin metal wires. The wires looked fragile. Maybe fragile enough to break. Katie found a metal tool on one of the workbenches. It looked like a Vorthack version of a screwdriver. She carefully inserted it between two of the crystal segments and applied gentle pressure. One of the connecting wires snapped. The crystal flickered, and its humming changed pitch. Katie had definitely affected something important. She broke another wire, then another. Each time, the device's behavior changed. The blue light was becoming dimmer and more unstable. But Katie could also feel that she was walking on the edge of disaster. If she broke the wrong wire, or broke too many at once, the device might explode immediately instead of shutting down. She had to be very careful. And very lucky. Katie took a deep breath and reached for the next wire. Katie's hand shook as she reached for the next wire. The crystal device was responding to every change she made, but not in ways she could predict. Breaking the first 3 wires had made it quieter, but breaking the 4th had caused it to pulse angry red instead of blue. She pulled her hand back and studied the pattern more carefully. The wires weren't just randomly connected. They formed a complex network that reminded her of a computer circuit board. Each wire probably carried different types of information or energy. Katie had studied electrical engineering before joining the military. She knew that cutting the wrong wire in a complex system could cause a catastrophic feedback loop. But she also knew that most systems had built-in safeguards to prevent exactly that kind of accident. The question was whether alien engineers thought the same way human engineers did. Katie decided to test her theory. Instead of cutting more wires, she traced them with her finger to see where they led. Some connected to the control panels on the walls. Others led to components inside the crystal that she couldn't see clearly. One wire was different from the others. It was thicker and made of a different material. Instead of the thin copper-colored metal used for most connections, this wire was dark silver and felt warm to the touch. Katie guessed this was a power line. If she could cut it, she might be able to shut down the entire device without triggering an explosion. But as she reached for the power wire, alarms started blaring throughout the ship. Not just in her room, but everywhere. Katie could hear the sound echoing through the corridors outside. She had triggered some kind of ship-wide alert system. Heavy footsteps pounded in the hallway. The Vorthack were coming to investigate. Katie had maybe 2 minutes before they reached her room. She grabbed the metal tool and pressed it against the power wire. But before she could cut it, something unexpected happened. The wire moved. It wasn't just a wire. It was some kind of flexible conduit that could adjust its own position. As Katie tried to cut it, the wire bent away from her tool. It was like trying to cut a snake that could see her coming. Katie tried a different approach. Instead of cutting the wire, she tried to disconnect it from its mounting point. But the connection was protected by some kind of force field. Every time she got close, her tool was pushed away by an invisible barrier. The footsteps in the hallway were getting closer. Katie could hear the chittering voices of Vortex soldiers. They would be here any second. She looked around the room desperately. There had to be another way to disable the device. Her eyes fell on the sensor probe she had moved earlier. It was still sitting in the corner where she had left it. An idea formed in Katie's mind. It was crazy and dangerous, but it might work. Instead of trying to shut down the device, what if she could make it think it had already completed its mission? The quantum destabilizer was designed to create a controlled explosion that would destroy a specific target. If Katie could fool it into thinking the target was already destroyed, it might shut itself down. Katie picked up the sensor probe and carried it back to the crystal. She positioned it right next to the device and started manipulating the controls on the nearest panel. Her goal was to make the device scan the probe and register it as destroyed. She tried different combinations of button presses and switch positions, watching how the crystal responded to each change. The door to the room burst open. 3 Vortex soldiers rushed in, their weapons raised. But they stopped short when they saw what Katie was doing. One of them shouted something in their language. It sounded like a warning or an order to stop. But Katie couldn't stop now. She was too close to a solution. The lead soldier raised his weapon and aimed it at Katie. But before he could fire, one of the other soldiers grabbed his arm. They had a rapid conversation in chittering sounds that Katie couldn't understand. Finally, the second soldier spoke to Katie in broken English. "Step away from device. You make situation worse." Katie shook her head. "I'm trying to shut it down. Give me 2 more minutes. Device is unstable. Your interference causes danger to entire ship." The device was already dangerous, Katie shot back. "You chained me to a bomb, remember?" The Vortex soldiers looked at each other uncertainly. Katie could see that they were scared. The quantum destabilizer was clearly more powerful and unpredictable than they had expected. Katie went back to work on the controls. She could feel the soldiers watching her every move, but they didn't try to stop her. Maybe they realized she was their best hope of avoiding disaster. The crystal device was responding to her manipulations, but not in the way she had hoped. Instead of shutting down, it was becoming more active. The blue light was getting brighter again, and new patterns were forming inside the crystal. Katie realized she had made a mistake. The device wasn't designed to shut down when it detected a destroyed target. It was designed to create a bigger explosion to make sure the target was completely eliminated. She had accidentally put the device into enhanced destruction mode. The countdown timer, which had been moving slowly, suddenly accelerated. Katie couldn't read alien numbers, but she could see that she had only minutes left instead of hours. One of the Vortex soldiers said something that sounded like a curse. All 3 of them backed toward the door, but they didn't leave. Katie suspected they had orders to guard her no matter what happened. Katie's mind raced. She had to try a completely different approach. Instead of trying to trick the device or shut it down normally, maybe she could overload it. If she could force it to use more power than it was designed for, it might burn out its own circuits. She started pressing buttons and flipping switches as fast as she could. Not randomly, but in patterns designed to activate multiple systems simultaneously. She was trying to make the device work harder than it was supposed to. The crystal responded immediately. It started pulsing faster and brighter than ever before. The humming sound became a roar. Cracks appeared in the walls around the room as space-time itself began to warp. But something else was happening too. Katie could see sparks flying from some of the control panels. The device was indeed starting to overload. Smoke began pouring from hidden circuits. The Vortex soldiers were backing toward the door now, clearly preparing to run. But Katie stayed at the controls. She was committed to this plan now. Either it would work, or they would all die together. More sparks flew. More smoke poured out. The crystal device was shaking violently, and the countdown was fluctuating wildly. Katie could see that the internal systems were fighting against each other. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. The crystal stopped pulsing. The humming stopped. Even the countdown timer froze in place. For a moment, Katie thought she had succeeded. But then she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The space around the crystal was still distorting. In fact, the distortions were getting worse. The device hadn't shut down. It had entered some kind of final phase. Katie could see energy building up inside the crystal, preparing for one massive release. She had maybe 30 seconds before it exploded with enough force to tear a hole in reality itself. Katie looked at the Vorthak soldiers. They were staring at her with what she could only describe as respect. They had expected her to panic or give up, but she had kept fighting until the very end. It wasn't over yet, though. Katie had one more idea. It was the most dangerous thing she had ever attempted, but it might be their only chance of survival. She was going to try to redirect the explosion. Katie stared at the crystal device as energy built up inside it like water behind a dam about to burst. She had seconds to act. The Vorthak technology was more advanced than anything humans had built, but it had one critical weakness. It was too logical. The alien engineers had designed their quantum destabilizer to work in predictable, orderly ways. Every system had backups. Every process followed strict protocols. It was the kind of technology that a hive mind would create, efficient, reliable, and completely rational. But Katie wasn't rational. She was desperate, creative, and willing to try things that no sane engineer would attempt. She grabbed cables from 2 different control panels and connected them directly to the crystal housing. This created a feedback loop that the alien systems had never been designed to handle. Sparks flew as competing electrical systems tried to talk to each other. The crystal flickered, confused by the contradictory signals it was receiving. Katie could see the energy patterns inside becoming chaotic and unpredictable. Good. Chaos was what she needed. Katie ripped more cables loose and started connecting them in random patterns. She was turning the sophisticated alien technology into a mess of crossed wires and conflicting commands. Every connection she made caused new error messages to appear on the displays. The Vorthak soldiers watched in horror as she systematically destroyed their carefully engineered device. One of them tried to stop her, but Katie spun around and glared at him. "Do you want to live or not?" she shouted. The soldier hesitated. Katie went back to her work. She pulled a panel off the wall and found the main power distribution system. It looked like the electrical version of a highway intersection, with dozens of conduits carrying energy to different parts of the ship. Katie started rerouting power connections. She took energy meant for life support and fed it into the communications array. She connected the navigation system to the weapons grid. She was creating a massive electrical traffic jam that made no sense from an engineering standpoint. But it was working. The quantum destabilizer was having trouble maintaining its explosion sequence when every system it relied on was receiving wrong information. The crystal was now pulsing in irregular patterns. Sometimes it glowed bright blue, sometimes dim red, sometimes it flickered between colors like a broken light bulb. The energy building up inside was becoming unstable and confused. Katie found the ship's main computer core and connected it directly to the destabilizer's control system. Now the bomb was trying to process navigation data and inventory reports while also managing a controlled nuclear reaction. The alien AI was sophisticated, but it wasn't designed for this kind of nonsense. Katie could practically hear it having a nervous breakdown as it tried to make sense of the contradictory information flooding its circuits. More sparks flew. More alarms blared. The lights in the room flickered on and off as power systems failed and rerouted themselves randomly. But the most important thing was that the countdown had stopped. The destabilizer couldn't figure out when it was supposed to explode because its timing circuits were being fed data about fuel reserves and crew schedules instead of temporal coordinates. Katie wasn't done yet. She found the ship's environmental controls and connected them to the destabilizer's targeting system. Now the bomb thought it was supposed to explode when the air conditioning reached the right temperature. She connected the food preparation systems to the quantum field generators. She linked the waste recycling units to the dimensional fold projectors. Every connection she made was technically incorrect and completely insane. But that was the point. The Vorthak had built their technology to be operated by logical, methodical minds. They had never considered what would happen if someone deliberately fed their system's garbage data. Katie was essentially giving the quantum destabilizer a massive case of technological indigestion. The crystal device was now making sounds like a dying robot. Instead of the smooth hum of a functioning weapon, it was producing random beeps, clicks, and electronic groans. Lights inside the crystal were flashing in sequences that followed no pattern Katie could recognize. One of the Vortex soldiers approached her cautiously. "What are you doing to our systems?" Katie looked up from her work, sweat dripping down her face. "I'm introducing chaos into your order. Your technology is too rigid. It can't handle random input." The soldier looked confused. "But chaos is inefficient. It serves no purpose." "Exactly," Katie said. "That's why it works." She made one final connection, linking the destabilizer's core processor to the ship's entertainment system. Now the bomb was trying to calculate quantum field dynamics while simultaneously processing music files and game programs. The crystal device made a sound like a sigh and went completely dark. For a moment, everyone in the room held their breath. Katie watched the displays around the room, waiting to see if her crazy plan had worked. The countdown timer was frozen. The energy readings were dropping towards zero. The space-time distortions around the crystal were fading away. The quantum destabilizer was completely confused and had given up trying to explode. Katie sat back against the wall, exhausted. She had done it. She had defeated advanced alien technology using the most human approach possible, making a mess until something broke. But her relief was short-lived. Alarms were still blaring throughout the ship, and she could hear sounds of panic in the corridors outside. Her sabotage had affected more than just the bomb. She had crippled the ship's entire computer network. The Vortex soldiers were looking at their weapons nervously. Without computer support, most of their equipment wasn't working properly. Katie realized this might be her chance to escape. The aliens were confused and their systems were down. If she could find a way off the ship, she might be able to get back to the Aurora with the intelligence data she had gathered. But as she stood up, Katie noticed something troubling. The space-time distortions around the crystal weren't completely gone. They were smaller and weaker than before, but they were still there. And they seemed to be growing slowly. Katie studied the readings on the displays that were still functioning. Her sabotage had prevented the destabilizer from exploding in a controlled manner, but it hadn't completely shut down the quantum field generator. Energy was still leaking out in small amounts. If the leakage continued, it would eventually build up enough to create an uncontrolled dimensional rift. Instead of a quick explosion, they would get a slow-motion disaster that could last for hours and affect a much larger area. Katie had saved them from immediate destruction, but she might have doomed them all to a slower death. She looked at the Vortex soldiers. They were starting to understand that something was still wrong. One of them was trying to read the displays, but most of the symbols were corrupted by Katie's interference. "We need to evacuate the ship," Katie told them. "This thing is still dangerous." The lead soldier nodded. "Our people are already preparing to abandon ship. But your people will not rescue you." Katie knew he was probably right. The Aurora couldn't risk getting too close to a ship with an unstable quantum weapon. Captain Hamilton would have to write her off as a casualty. Unless she could find another way. Katie looked around the room one more time. Her sabotage had created chaos, but chaos could cut both ways. If she could figure out how to control the disorder she had created, she might be able to turn it into something useful. Something that could get her home. Katie started studying the crossed wires and random connections she had made. Hidden in all that technological confusion might be the key to her escape. Katie traced the chaotic web of connections she had created, looking for something she could use. The random links between systems had shut down the bomb, but they had also created unexpected pathways for energy and information to flow through the ship. One connection caught her attention. She had accidentally linked the destabilizer's dimensional fold projector to the ship's communication array. The quantum device was now trying to send messages through space-time itself instead of normal radio waves. Katie had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. What if she could use that connection to send a signal to the Aurora? Not a normal radio message, but a quantum transmission that could punch through the Vortac jamming systems. It would be like using the alien weapon as a massive communication device. She started working on the control panels again, but this time with a specific goal. Instead of creating more chaos, she was trying to shape the chaos into something useful. Katie isolated the communication connection from the other random links she had made. Then she carefully adjusted the power levels feeding into the quantum projector. Too little power and the signal wouldn't reach the Aurora. Too much power and she would restart the explosion sequence. The crystal device flickered back to life, but in a completely different way than before. Instead of the angry blue glow of a weapon, it now pulsed with a soft white light. The energy patterns inside looked almost peaceful. Katie found what looked like a transmission control and started tapping out a message in Morse code. She had no idea if the quantum field would preserve the signal timing, but it was worth trying. Aurora, this is Katie. Ship compromised. Need immediate pickup. Quantum instability in progress. She repeated the message several times, then waited. The ship's sensors were too damaged to tell her if the transmission had reached its target. Meanwhile, the situation on the Vortac ship was getting worse. Katie could hear explosions echoing through the corridors as damaged systems failed throughout the vessel. The aliens were definitely abandoning ship. One of the Vortac soldiers approached her. You must come with us. Escape pods are ready. Katie shook her head. I'm staying here. If I leave, this device might go completely out of control. The soldier looked at her with something that might have been respect. You would sacrifice yourself for your enemies. I would sacrifice myself to prevent a disaster that could hurt innocent people, Katie replied. Including my own crew. The soldier was quiet for a moment. Then he said something to his companions in their own language. They had a brief discussion before the soldier turned back to Katie. We will stay also. Our duty is to guard you. Katie was surprised. She hadn't expected that kind of honor from her captors. But she didn't have time to think about it. The quantum distortions around the crystal were getting stronger again. Her improvised communication system was working, but it was also feeding energy back into the destabilizer. Every time she sent a message, the device became a little more unstable. Katie realized she was facing an impossible choice. She could keep sending signals and hope the Aurora received them, but doing so would eventually cause the quantum device to explode. Or she could stop transmitting and try to stabilize the device, but then her crew would never know where to find her. Before she could decide, the choice was taken away from her. The door to the room exploded inward, and human soldiers in space suits rushed in. Katie, shouted a familiar voice. It was Major Tony Brooks from the Aurora. We got your signal. Time to go. Katie had never been so happy to see another human being. But as she started toward the rescue team, the crystal device behind her began screaming like a siren. Her departure had triggered another security protocol. The destabilizer was designed to prevent its technology from falling into enemy hands. If unauthorized personnel tried to approach it, the device would self-destruct immediately. Everyone get down. Katie yelled. The room filled with blinding light as the crystal released a massive pulse of energy. But instead of an explosion, something even stranger happened. The pulse created a temporary rift in space-time itself. Katie could see through the rift to another part of space. In the distance, she could make out the familiar shape of the Aurora. The quantum device had accidentally opened a portal between the two ships. The rift won't last long, Katie shouted over the screaming alarms. We have to go now. Tony and his team didn't hesitate. They grabbed Katie and the three Vortac soldiers and dove through the dimensional portal just as it began to collapse. They tumbled out of the rift and onto the deck of the Aurora's shuttle bay. Behind them, the portal snapped shut with a sound like thunder. Katie looked around, hardly believing she was safe. Captain Hamilton was there, along with Commander Parker and half the ship's crew. Everyone was staring at the Vortac soldiers with a mixture of confusion and concern. It's okay, Katie said quickly. They helped me. We need to get medical attention for everyone and then get away from here as fast as possible. What about the Vortex ship? Commander Parker asked. Katie looked at one of the alien soldiers. He understood enough English to answer. Ship is lost. Quantum device cannot be stopped now. We must flee. Captain Hamilton nodded. You heard him. All hands, prepare for emergency jump. We're getting out of here. The Aurora's engines roared to life, and the ship began moving away from the doomed Vortex vessel. Through the viewports, Katie could see the alien ship in the distance. It was still intact, but she could see space around it beginning to warp and twist. How long before it goes critical? Captain Hamilton asked. The Vortex soldier consulted a device on his wrist. Perhaps 1 hour. Maybe less. The quantum cascade cannot be predicted. Katie slumped against the wall, exhausted. She had survived being chained to a bomb, escaped from an alien prison, and prevented a quantum disaster from destroying both ships. But she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The 3 Vortex soldiers were now prisoners on a human ship. They had valuable intelligence about their species' technology and military capabilities. But they had also shown honor and courage in staying with Katie when they could have escaped. Captain Hamilton seemed to be thinking the same thing. He approached the alien soldiers carefully. You saved one of our people, he said. We won't forget that. The lead soldier replied in his broken English. Your Katie Morgan showed us something new. Chaos can be useful. Order is not always best way. Katie smiled. Maybe humans and Vortex weren't so different after all. Maybe they could find a way to coexist in the galaxy. But first, they had to get far enough away to survive the explosion of the quantum destabilizer. Through the viewports, Katie could see the Vortex ship beginning to glow like a small star. Space around it was bending and twisting in impossible ways. Whatever happened next was going to be spectacular. And very, very dangerous. Captain, called the navigation officer. We're at minimum safe distance. Keep going, Captain Hamilton ordered. I want to be twice as far away as minimum safe distance suggests. Katie nodded approvingly. When dealing with unknown quantum effects, there was no such thing as being too careful. Behind them, the doomed alien ship continued to glow brighter as it prepared for its final transformation. The Aurora had reached what should have been a safe distance when the Vortex ship finally reached critical mass. Katie watched through the main viewport as the vessel began to glow like a miniature sun. The quantum distortions around it were visible now, making space itself look like rippling water. Energy readings are off the charts, reported the science officer. Whatever's happening over there, it's unlike anything in our databases. Captain Hamilton stood next to Katie, both of them staring at the light show in the distance. Your sabotage really did a number on their systems. Katie nodded, but she was worried. The explosion was taking much longer than expected. Instead of a quick detonation, the quantum destabilizer seemed to be building up energy for something much bigger. Captain, called the communications officer. I'm getting reports from other ships in the system. They're detecting gravitational anomalies. Whatever that device is doing, it's affecting spacetime across several light years. The lead Vortex soldier, who had been quietly observing from the corner of the bridge, suddenly stepped forward. His translator device crackled to life. Captain Hamilton, we must move ship immediately. Device is not exploding. It is opening. Opening what? Katie asked. Dimensional gateway. Your chaos modification changed purpose of destabilizer. Instead of destroying space, it creates passage through space. Katie felt her stomach drop. A passage to where? The alien's reply chilled everyone on the bridge. To Vortex home system. Your sabotage accidentally created invasion portal. Captain Hamilton immediately turned to his crew. All hands, emergency acceleration. Maximum speed, now. But as the Aurora's engines roared to life, Katie realized they had a bigger problem. Through the viewport, she could see that the glowing Vortex ship wasn't just opening a portal. It was being pulled into that portal, along with everything else in the surrounding area. We're caught in a gravitational current, reported the helmsman. The portal is drawing us in. Katie's mind raced. Her improvised sabotage had accidentally turned the quantum destabilizer into a dimensional gateway. But the gateway was unstable and out of control. Instead of creating a precise passage between 2 points, it was tearing a massive hole in space-time that was sucking in everything nearby. "Can we break free?" Captain Hamilton asked. "Negative, sir. The gravitational field is too strong." Katie looked at the Vortex soldiers. "Is there any way to shut down the portal from here?" The lead soldier shook his head. "Device responds only to direct contact. But approach is impossible. Gravity field would crush ship before reaching device." Katie stared at the swirling portal ahead of them. The Aurora and the remaining pieces of the Vortex ship were being drawn toward a glowing tunnel that led to unknown space. If they went through, they might emerge in the middle of an enemy fleet. Or they might be torn apart by dimensional forces. But Katie had an idea. It was dangerous and probably impossible, but it was their only chance. "Captain, what if we don't fight the portal? What if we use it?" "Use it how?" Katie pointed at the readings on the science station. "Look at the energy patterns. The portal isn't stable. It's fluctuating between different dimensional frequencies. If we could time it right, we might be able to redirect where it leads." The science officer looked up from his instruments. "She's right. The portal is cycling through multiple possible destinations. But the frequency changes are completely random." "Not random," Katie said. "Chaotic. And chaos can be influenced if you understand the patterns." She turned to the Vortex soldier. "Your people built this device to create controlled dimensional passages. There must be targeting protocols built into the system." The alien nodded slowly. "Yes. Device has navigation component. But it requires specific quantum signatures to lock onto destinations." Katie smiled. "Then we're going to give it some quantum signatures it's never seen before." She ran to the communications station and started working frantically. The Aurora's communication array was sophisticated enough to generate a wide range of quantum frequencies. If she could broadcast the right signal at the right moment, she might be able to influence where the portal led. "What are you trying to do?" Captain Hamilton asked. "I'm going to aim this thing at empty space," Katie replied. "If I can override the portal's targeting system, we can emerge somewhere safe instead of in the middle of enemy territory." The ship shuddered as it was pulled deeper into the gravitational field. Through the viewport, Katie could see they were getting close to the portal entrance. The tunnel of light ahead looked like the mouth of some cosmic beast. Katie worked desperately at the controls, trying to generate the right quantum signature. She needed a frequency that would represent empty space rather than a populated star system. But she had no idea what that frequency should be. Then she remembered something the Vortex soldier had said. Their technology was based on order and logic. Their navigation systems probably used mathematical coordinates to identify destinations. But what if she fed the system something that wasn't mathematical at all? Katie pulled up the Aurora's cultural database and found what she was looking for. Human music. She selected a piece that was as chaotic and unpredictable as possible, a jazz improvisation that followed no logical pattern. She converted the music into quantum frequencies and began broadcasting it toward the portal. The effect was immediate. The portal's swirling light changed color from blue to purple to green. The gravitational field fluctuated wildly, making the Aurora shake and buck like a wild animal. "Katie, what are you doing?" Captain Hamilton shouted over the noise. "I'm teaching an alien navigation system to appreciate jazz." Katie shouted back. The portal was responding to the musical input, but not in any predictable way. The tunnel ahead was shifting and changing, sometimes narrow, sometimes wide, sometimes splitting into multiple passages. 30 seconds to portal entry, called the helmsman. Katie watched the readings and waited for the right moment. The jazz music was creating chaos in the portal's targeting system, but she needed to time her final move perfectly. 20 seconds. Katie saw what she was waiting for. The portal's energy readings showed a brief moment when the system was completely confused, cycling rapidly between multiple destinations. 10 seconds. Katie transmitted one final signal. Not music this time, but something even more chaotic. She broadcast the quantum signature of her own thoughts, the unpredictable, intuitive, thoroughly human pattern of her consciousness. The portal exploded with light just as the Aurora plunged into it. For a moment, Katie felt like she was being turned inside out. Reality twisted around her as the ship passed through dimensions that human minds weren't meant to perceive. She could taste colors and hear light and feel time flowing backward. Then, suddenly, they were through. The Aurora emerged into normal space, engines still running, all systems intact. Katie looked around frantically, expecting to see enemy ships or strange alien worlds. Instead, she saw familiar stars. They were in a system only a few light years from Earth. Her chaotic sabotage had brought them home. Behind them, the portal collapsed with a flash of light that lit up half the solar system. The quantum destabilizer and what remained of the Vortex ship were gone, lost somewhere in the space between dimensions. Captain Hamilton turned to Katie with a mixture of amazement and exhaustion. "Remind me never to doubt human ingenuity again." Katie slumped into a chair, finally allowing herself to feel tired. Sometimes the best solution is the one that makes no sense at all. The lead Vortex soldier approached her. Through his translator, he said, "You have taught us much about the value of chaos. Perhaps our peoples can learn from each other." Katie nodded. "I'd like that. But next time, let's skip the part where I get chained to a bomb." As the Aurora set course for Earth, Katie reflected on everything that had happened. She had been captured, tortured, and nearly killed. But she had also discovered something important about the differences between human and alien thinking. The Vortex were logical, efficient, and predictable. Those were valuable traits. But humans had something equally valuable, the ability to find creative solutions when logic failed. Sometimes chaos was exactly what the universe needed. And sometimes the most human thing you could do was refuse to give up, even when you were handcuffed to a live bomb.